Welcome along. It's another West London VR race preview. Race 3.11, that's 3:11. Race 3, number 11 from Series 3. 2 more to go after this, 13 in the series. It's all getting very exciting. So, what's going to happen in race 3.11? Essentially, we're going to go along the Thames, and it's going to be all about the last 2.5 kilometres, which is uphill, gently uphill, I should say. But more of that later. Let's explain what the race is all about. Young Berks and Old Bucks, or Young Berks and Old Bucks as they would pronounce it locally. Berks being Berkshire and Bucks being in Buckinghamshire. We're going to ride through mainly Berkshire, and all of the bits of Berkshire that we're riding through used to be in Buckinghamshire. So it's been in Berkshire since 1972, and predating that it was all in Buckinghamshire. So Young Berks and Old Bucks, rather than young men and old men being referred to in terms of what their mental state is, I suspect. So where are we? We've just left a hotel in Langley. Essentially, Langley is the east end of Slough. The hotel there is, I suppose, equidistant between the centre of Slough and Heathrow Airport, London's main airport, and therefore does its trade from either people going to the airport or on business in Slough. So used to be a Holiday Inn. I think it's a Marriott now. And we're going along this road, which is going alongside the motorway, just on the left. You can see the traffic on the motorway. That's the M4, the London to Bristol, and on through Wales, all the way up to Swansea. So we're going the opposite direction. This is usually quite a fast road when we ride it locally. And the reason there's so little traffic, there's actually another road, the other side of the motorway, which most of the traffic uses. So this one, just as I say that, a car goes past, 2 cars go past, but this is usually quite a nice little road to cycle along because you get very little traffic, and it's flat, fast, with the right wind can be most enjoyable. Usually the wind, we would be riding into a headwind as we're going along here, because the prevailing winds are usually southwesterly, and we're heading west. Now, as I say, this is flat along the motorway. We are going to twist over the motorway in a second, so there is a sort of slight incline here. In fact, it's the reason you can see the purple sort of cabling along the road there. You can see it's sort of fairly newly constructed curbstones there. Is because they've had to replace all the bridges along this stretch of the M4. I'm not quite sure why. They were all very similar, but obviously reached a point where they're fatigued, and they've all been replaced along this section. And this cabling is part of the feed for all the workmen who built the new bridge, and we're about to go over the new bridge. And I think personally the new bridge has a slightly gentler climb up to it than we used to have on the old bridge, and that makes sense because it's slightly further along the motorway. You can't really see any traces of the old bridge, but it hasn't been gone long. I think we were one of the first cyclists to ever go over this bridge because they were still building it, and they were nearly finished. You can see the works there. These are the guys finishing the works from the new bridge. As I say, I think we went along it when it was sort of almost finished, and the workmen just let us ride over it, even though it wasn't actually open. So as I say, this little climb up to this bridge here is not particularly going to notice, I think, on the race, but beware, it's there, about 1.5 kilometres or so into the race. We go over the motorway, drop down again. Now, most of this route is going to be fairly flat because, like a lot of our flat races, it's actually going along parallel with the River Thames. We're not actually going to go too close to the River Thames on any occasions. There's a couple of them will be close, but you won't see it. So we're following the route of the River Thames, so we're going on a river valley, and it's quite flat. And before 1972, the River Thames was the border between Buckinghamshire and Berkshire. And in 1972, it was moved northwards to encompass basically Slough into Berkshire. So Slough left Buckinghamshire, went into Berkshire, and the border was moved up from the river to the other side of Slough. So we're basically south of Slough now, going along the river towards Windsor, but we're not quite going to go to Windsor. We're going to go to Eton, but you can see it's going to be fairly flat because we're going to be going along the valley. So this isn't going to produce much other than keep the peloton going. So it's all going to be about the last climb in the last 2.5 kilometres, because what happens is we go along the river valley. We're going to go across Dorney Common, as you'll see shortly, which is very, very flat. And then we're going to hit the Bath Road and go upwards towards Burnham. And we'll be going up the side of the Thames Valley at that point. So it's all going to be sort of, fast and furious peloton stuff. This is Datchet Village here, which retains some of the oldie worldy charm, and even some of the buildings, like there's one just ahead of us on the left there, with the wooden beams. In fact, that's quite a modern building. Was made, the one on our left here, that's quite a modern building, and was actually just built to fit in the character of the village, more than these ones here, I suspect. So we're going through Datchet. We're just going to go up a little bit north and then get the road that goes down to Eton College playing fields. This is all flat. We've ridden them before on RGT races with West London VR. So some of you might recognise some of the bits of this video, and this is quite a regular ride for local riders. There's a popular cafe in Windsor called Cinnamon Cafe, which is in the railway station, or the Western Region railway station, anywhere opposite Windsor Castle. So it is a bit of a mecca for tourists these days, Windsor. The cafe there has turned Windsor, or the centre of Windsor outside the castle, into just actually, for everybody who's not on a bike, probably a bit of a nightmare, but it's certainly a bit of a cycling cafe mecca. So here we go. This is where we're going to turn left. Now we're back sort of I suppose parallel with the Thames, and we're heading towards Eton College playing fields. Not a lot to say along this road. I mean, it is going to be flat. The peloton should hold together for us, and it's the usual thing. I mean, if you get dropped off the back of the peloton and it's going fast, which it usually does, it can be hard to get on. So for lesser mortals such as myself, it's all about making sure that you don't get dropped on these sections. I inevitably do it at some point, and hopefully I find myself in a group of similar sort of people, and we have our own little private race in the second tier. But it's just as much fun if you do manage to stay in the peloton at the end, because obviously you can go for the sprint and see how well you did. And for somebody like me, a lucky day in the peloton is quite a triumph. So West London VR races are not graded. There's no category A, B, C, D. There's a number of reasons for this. I mean, we think there's nothing wrong with people categorising races, but we prefer not to, because we think natural pelotons will form of similar ability riders, and they can compete with each other. So there's a natural selection rather than a enforced category selection. And there is always the risk with categories that people of a higher grade just drop down a division to make sure they win, which is slightly unfair for the people who are in the right division. So as I say, we've nothing against categorising races. I mean, we think it serves a purpose, and I would imagine that some of you do categorise races, graded races, as well as all-comers races like our own. But as I say, we prefer to think that the natural selection will come, and I certainly find myself in little groups of people of similar ability to myself at the end with the peloton way up the road. But there we are. Each to his own. If you don't like that, you don't ride, and if you agree with us, then I'm sure you enjoyed many a little jewel further back in the race. So we're heading towards Eton now. We're not far off. Once we get past this bridge, we're sort of hitting the area where the Eton College playing fields are. Eton College, of course, again, has been ridden past and round on many a West London RGT race. It's a nice little area to cycle. It's very picturesque, Eton, and sort of adds to the tourist charm of Windsor. People coming out to see the castle, and invariably probably not seeing the Queen, who lives there. But anyway, it's we'll see a little bit of Eton, but not go all the way into Windsor, because we're not crossing the River Thames. Of course, Eton used to be in Buckinghamshire and is now in Berkshire, the same as Windsor, so it's much more aligned to Windsor, whereas prior to 1972, Eton was aligned to Slough, the town just to the north, and two contrasting places. You'd do well to find two more contrasting places, you'd do well to find Eton College and Slough, of course, because we had Eton College just here, and just up the road we had Eton and Slough Secondary School, which was, should we say, for a different class of person. In fact, my my sister-in-law used to teach there, so she can tell you all about that. So as I say, these now, you're seeing through the hedges, you're beginning to see some of the playing fields, I believe, and so many a Prime Minister will have had a game of football or something, or the Eton Wall game or whatever else they do in their rugby on those playing fields. So here we go, left. This is the old road from Slough to Windsor, when they used to go over the bridge at the end of Eton High Street. Long since closed and pedestrianised, and there's a dual carriageway road that it goes a couple of miles to our right as we go here, that takes you from Slough to Windsor in the other way, known as the Windsor Relief Road, because it took the traffic out of the centre of Eton and Windsor. So here we go, you can see Eton College Chapel, a large building straight in front of us, and all these buildings that we're about to sort of hit, the first lot anyway, are all Eton College buildings of one description or another, I believe. I didn't go to school there, so I can't vouch for every building, but I'm pretty sure that most of the buildings that you're going to see and behind this wall are all Eton College owned buildings. So, as I say, this is Eton High Street. You can see the first few tourists walking down to have a look at it. It is quaint and it is nice. I mean, it's I suppose it's more touristy today than it would have been back in 1972 when it changed counties, when it was much more sort of functional. But anyway, it's I think tourism has boomed. I suppose since World War II, more people have got cars, more people have got spare cash, and more people have visiting places. And so the traditional shops that would have been down Eton High Street many a year ago are now all replaced by sort of restaurants and charming little quaint shops aimed at tourists, and we're about to find out. This is where it all is. This is we're past the college now. These are the shops. You can see it's much more sort of little tables and chairs outside of buildings, which might have been, a greengrocer or something back in 1972. Nevertheless, it still retains its oldie worldy charm. It is a nice place to visit. We do recommend it. It's I think it's probably a lot of people go to Windsor and actually don't cross the bridge and see Eton High Street, but as I say, it's quite nice. Now if you go straight on here, as we are, it becomes a one-way system, and if you keep going straight you just go over the pedestrianised bridge that I mentioned earlier. But we're going to sweep round and go behind all these buildings, and of course, like everything else in the world, the facade of this nice little high street is not continued round to the back streets and the car parks, where the buildings of course are less charming and more modern, shall we say. So here we go, we're coming up to the bit where you go to over the bridge. So straight ahead would be over the bridge and into Windsor. You can see that's pedestrianised as we get stuck behind the tourist bus, on these little open top buses where people sort of drive round and see Windsor, Eton, and I think they go to Datchet as well. So you won't have to pay to go on one of those, because you've just done it on a West London VR race preview. I should probably go. I've gone on one of those and picked up some of the interesting historic facts from the tour guide to relate over this video, but I didn't. Now everybody else will go right here, but we discovered this lane down here about a year or so, which is sort of slightly pointless because it just brings you out on the road we would have gone on anyway, but it's nicer to cycle because there's no cars on it and it's nice and green, and you don't run any pedestrians and tourists over and get in trouble for doing so. So nothing still to report here. This is just basically a back route out of Eton. I don't know what all these cars are for. I mean, I don't know if they go fishing or something in the river there and just leave their cars there, but maybe it's just a cheap place to park without paying when you visit Windsor. But so we're going to sweep round to the right in a second, and that'll just bring us back out in Eton, near the chapel. If you remember, I pointed out the chapel a little while ago when we were coming into Eton. So we've just done a big loop and come back on ourselves. We're not going to quite go, so this is a right hand turn. This takes us back up towards the chapel, as I say, in the Eton College buildings. And any second now, you'll see the college buildings or some of their sort of peripheral buildings. We're just going to pass a few. We're not going to quite go back to Eton High Street. We're going to hang a left and go up to Eton Wick and Dorney Common. So we're going to go out of the charming bits into the less charming bits. Although I do find Dorney Common to have a sort of certain, I'm going to say medieval charm. I don't know if it really is medieval, but it is an old piece of common land, and I never understood. I never really quite understood this until I was a bit older. But there was in medieval times, and sort of some point, I don't know when, but probably around 1700s, I would guess, and that really is a random guess. They had something called the Enclosures Act, where in the past all land had been common, so anybody could graze their cows and sheep on it, and all of a sudden the landowners were allowed to enclose their land, and the commoners had nowhere to send their sheep and cows and horses or whatever. So here we are back in Eton. This is the left. This takes us up towards Eton Wick and Dorney Common. But going back to Dorney Common, as I understand it, and I have never really studied this properly, the Enclosures Act did allow landowners to enclose land, and it deprived the common people of places to graze their sheep. And I think the legacy of that, or the compromise, or whatever they must have come up with, was to leave a certain amount of common land. Now, the Enclosures Act, as far as I am aware, caused probably more fuss than Brexit caused over here, because it really did deprive a lot of people. But anyway, they went through, and as I say, the common land was left. So you quite often see these little bits of common land where anybody's allowed to graze their cattle and sheep. And as we go into Dorney Common, which is flat and open, we go over the cattle grids. And in fact, you quite often go over there and you'll see random cattle and sheep and livestock grazing there, and presumably just taken there by a local farmer, because there's a supply of grass that he doesn't have to nurture and pay for. So anyway, Dorney Common's coming up, but first we're going to go through Eton Wick. Eton Wick doesn't have any of the charm of Eton, the actual Eton. I don't know what the difference between a wick and a town is. It's obviously some old Anglo-Saxon word. We'll have to look up what wick means. And yes, thanks, I do realise it's the taper inside a candle wax, but ignoring that, I'm not quite sure what a wick is. Anyway, there's plenty of villages in Britain with the name Wick at the end of them, and I always assume it's just some Anglo-Saxon derived word. So here we go, we're heading up towards Eton Wick, and again, you know, we're still flat. We're still on this little flat bit in the river. We're not really hitting the side of the Thames Valley properly yet. I mean, it's I don't quite understand geographically why it's flat here. I should imagine it's just the bottom of a valley that's just kind of I suppose over the years of the millions of years of rivers forming, it's just flattened out. Certainly the the flatness here has enabled them to build Dorney Rowing Centre, which is where the Olympic rowing was held, and they carved out a huge rowing lake, I suppose, Dorney Lake. And when you fly, out of Heathrow westwards, or to the western side of Heathrow, and you just look down, and there's this huge expanse of water, which is just simply there for people to row up and down. And as I say, it's pretty high standard, because the Olympics were certainly held there. So here we are. This is Eton Wick, as you can see, lacking the charms of its namesake Eton, but nevertheless, I'm sure a pleasant place to live, and reasonably rural, but access to major shopping and other facilities, both in Slough, Windsor, and of course Maidenhead. This is sort of three towns in the area. If they all joined up, it would be huge, but I suspect there's laws to stop you building on the little bits of green in between them, if there is any green between them left. I don't think there's much between Slough and Maidenhead, that's for sure. So here we are, we're going through the centre of what is Eton Wick. As you can see, much more modern buildings, a more functional place than the old Eton. It's even got its own pedestrian crossings. Look at that, all the mod cons. So we go, get going again as we go past the shops, over the speed bump, and head towards Dorney Common. Now, Dorney Common is one of those little challenges that I often wonder what the Strava top 10 is made up of. In terms of when we get to Dorney Common, you'll see that it's very, very wide open, and you get very strong winds there, and they can be against you, behind you, or from the side. And obviously if they're against you or from the side, it's a very hard cycle, so it's quite a good challenge. And if you want to work out, it's a good place to go and fight the wind along Dorney Common. I know we've certainly had to do echelons along there just to sort of kind of get through it on some days. But if the wind's behind you, there's nothing going to stop you. And I do wonder if all the Strava KOMs that ever get Dorney Common have just waited for the sort of strongest prevailing wind and gone in the right direction, because I suspect you can probably do some fantastic speeds. So here we go. This is over the cattle grid onto the common land, where obviously people are allowed to graze their cattle. Can't see any there right now, but you can see how open it is, and therefore how exposed to the wind it is. And as I say, we've been actually ridden over here in little echelons of 3 to just get over the thing, because it can be horrendous. But nothing to report today. A nice, reasonably still day, as you can see from the pictures as we go across Dorney Common. I can't even remember when I filmed this whether I was against or with the wind, to be honest. It's probably most likely to be a side wind from the left, would be the most likely, I would say, which makes it, if you got that wind, it's probably harder coming in the other direction than it is this direction. But anyway, it is what it is. There's floods along here as well. I mean, this is being flat and on the Thames Valley. You can quite often come along here, and the 2 sides of the road are flooded. You can see they've actually raised the road up a little bit so that it doesn't get caught out by the flooding that obviously prevails on this stretch of land. It's a bit of an oasis getting a piece of common land like this, so big, so close to London, to be honest. I'm sure there are plenty of other ones, and I don't know whether so-called commons like Wimbledon Common or Tooting Common in London are actually commons, or they're just historically commons. But if anybody wants to take their herd of sheep along and start grazing them on Wimbledon Common, we'll see if the police come and try and move you along. Anyway, we're coming towards the end of it now. It is one of those when you're actually having a hard day along here. The end can't come quick enough, and of course when the end does come, you go over a cattle grid, because obviously it's designed to keep the cattle inside the common. But and straight away you're in amongst those trees that you can see just ahead of you, and the whole effect of the wind just subsides at the moment you go over that cattle grid, and the whole ride changes. Suddenly you're a world beater again. So where those white fences are just ahead, that's the cattle grid. So we're going to go over that now, and out of Eatonwick into I suppose it's Dorney Common there, but we're into Dorney now, which again is the place that gives its name to Dorney Lake, which is where the huge rowing lake is, used for the 2012 London Olympics. Again, this is going to be fairly flat, and we're going to follow this road now up to what I'm going to call the Bath Road. Now, the Bath Road is the A4, which essentially historically was the road from London to Bristol. And at that point, when we hit the Bath Road, the valley starts to rise. So we're heading northwards, but we're on this sort of flat plain, river plain at the bottom. But as soon as we go over the Bath Road, the main A4, which historically, as I say, was the road from London to Bristol. Of course, nowadays we'd do it on the motorway, auto route, highway, whatever you want to call it. We would use the M4, which is the road we saw right at the beginning, if you remember, with the purple cabling along the side. That was the M4 that sort of effectively takes all the traffic off the A4 these days, the A4, the historic road. But as I say, once we cross the A4, that's basically the last 2.5 kilometres as we head up to Burnham, and that's where this race, I think, is going to be decided. Now, The side of the Thames Valley, the north side of the Thames Valley in these parts, geologists will tell you is called the Taplow Terrace. And this is because it sort of goes up and there's a little bit of respite and then it goes up again. So there's these sort of almost like steps going up if you looked at it from a long way out. And about halfway up we do get this little respite. So 2.5 kilometres of going uphill, a little bit of a respite. We're just going over the Jubilee River, which is basically an escape route to stop the Thames flooding. Really, it's a little bit of a sort of tributary that goes off to one side and takes some of the Thames water. As I say, when we get to Burnham, we start going up. We go up for a little while, then we get a minor bit of respite, then we start going up again, and then we twist back on ourselves, and the finish is going to be a downhill sprint. So you've probably got 500 metres of downhill sprint at the very end, down Burnham High Street, but more of that later. We'll see in a minute. So now we're going to go over the M4. This is one of these new bridges. I was explaining that they had to demolish all the bridges and build new ones. And again, you can see the construction site just to the left where they've taken down the old bridge, and this is the new one that they've put in. So again, all along this section it's all brand spanking new bridges. You can tell there's no potholes on the tarmac because it's a new bridge, and even the bollards are still there. So again, I don't know that this is particularly going to show up, and certainly in a large peloton you'll get swept over this bridge even if there is a bit of a gradient. So it's not a feature that we have to take a lot of notice of. So we're going to head, as I say, towards the Bath Road. Now normally on a cycle ride I would go straight on, but just for you I've changed the route a little bit and we're going to go down this road. It's going to take us a different way to the way I would normally ride. So I think this is Huntercombe Lane, which if anybody's ever taken the junction Slough West, comes out at the Huntercombe pub. So I don't know what the Huntercombe was, but there must be some historic reason why everything around here is called Huntercombe. But anyway, this will take us up to the A4 Bath Road, and it's interesting that the Bath Road is always called the Bath Road, but really it's the road from London to Bristol. And we have to remember that if you went back hundreds of years, Bath and Bristol were rival towns of almost same size. I mean, I think Bath might have even been the more important town, and the Romans, of course, settled there. But Bristol was a port and got richer and richer and richer. And more embarrassingly than ever, of course, it was involved in the triangular trade, which involved slavery. And so Bristol, really through the globalisation and it being a port and the trade that brought, grew much bigger and more important than Bath. Of course, Bath, by not growing, has retained a phenomenal charm. And it's a wonderful place to visit, and they've still got the Roman baths there and everything else like that. That's why it's called Bath, because of the Roman baths and special waters there. And but the road is always called the Bath Road because Bath was the important town, I guess, more important than Bristol once, not now. So we're still on the flat, but we're getting ever closer to the Bath Road, and you can see it just there. And there's set traffic lights here. And this is where it all begins to change after the set traffic lights. I mean, probably very slightly going uphill as we approach the traffic lights. Luckily, they will all be green. I've had a word with the local council, and on the night of the race, these lights will be green, so you won't have to stop. You will fly through this. You can see, yeah, it's slightly raised. Even I'm going to have to pull away from these lights, with a slight gradient as we go up towards Burnham. As I say, I mean, it starts off gentle, but if you look at the profile, and we always recommend that you do have a look at the profile of a West London VR race. We publish them on Ride with GPS. If you go to www.westlondoncycling.com, westlondoncycling.com, you can look up all the races. There's a whole menu there of all the races, and you can do all the links and have a look at the courses and everything. We do put them out on the Facebook groups and Discord and things like that as well for everybody, to save you the bother of hunting them down on our website. But we do that as the race comes up. But if you want to look at a couple of races ahead, then by all means do on www.westlondoncycling.com. Everything you need to know about Series 3. And we'll be getting to work on Series 4 very, very soon. So as I say, we're slightly rising now as we head towards Burnham Village. As I say, this is going to be a loop, so we're going to go up and up and up, apart from the little respite bit. And then we're going to double back on ourselves for a downhill finish about 500 metres. All the railway bridges, for some reason, along here are a little bit narrow. And I've no idea why they were built so narrow, but I suppose the answer is they're probably hundreds of years old and weren't built for today's traffic, but they've never actually been improved. So there's about 3 bridges, I think, along here, or certainly 2 anyway, where you always have to wait at the traffic lights because it's only single file. So here we go. No editing this week. I sometimes edit those out if I'm there for too long. So we go under the railway bridge. This is the main railway from London to Bristol, because I think most things along here are basically built along the old road or the old railway between London and Bristol, 2 major cities, and of course once Bath. Now you can see we're definitely climbing. I mean, it's gradual. I never put particularly steep climbs on here. It's not going to be brutal, but it's at race pace. Remember, if you can get in a peloton and sit behind people, these are far more manageable, and the bigger the peloton, the easier it is to stay in, of course. But if it does fragment at any point, the smaller the groups, the harder it is to stay in them and the more likely to drop off. But again, this is a gentle bit of climbing. We come up to it gets a little bit steeper, but again, as I say, these hills aren't meant to be brutally steep hills to make your life difficult. So slight right turn here, Limp Rise Road, and again you can see it's going up a bit more now. That's a bit steeper than it has been, but no, it's not a steep hill by any stretch of the imagination, and it flattens out a little bit here, so you get a bit of respite along the way. As I say, never particularly steep, but just remember that if you're paranoid, the guys at the front, if you put a bit of pressure on here, you could lose half the peloton off the back with the right move. Who knows? It depends on the size of the peloton, but I think it is possible to cause some damage in this last 2.5 kilometres. Remember that the weaker riders that will have spent a lot of effort just staying in the peloton up to that point probably won't have much left if there is a serious attack off the front. The stronger riders, of course, I think will stay with you, but of course collectively, if you whittle it all down, then your chances are better in the bunch sprint at the end. Now, we all know that the bunch sprint in these races actually makes them slightly exciting. Some of the better riders do get a little bit frustrated because they time it wrong and they don't get as high as they should. But it does give some glory to the rest of us. Once in a while, one of us more mere mortals, has a good day and gets a good finish in the peloton. I think I like the races to be sort of mixed up a little bit, and some suit the big pelotons, and some hopefully will break them up. I'm sort of hoping this one will probably split the peloton into 2 groups, and you get two sprints at the end, but we'll see. It's not that steep, and it might not be steep enough to make that break, but that was the theory behind the course. So we're going up a hill again, and we're going up towards Burnham Village. So we're going to see Burnham Village twice, once when we finish and once on the way round, so you can have a look at the finishing line from here. And say we're continuing to go up, but not at any great pace, gradient should I say. In fact, it probably looks flat on the screen right now, doesn't it? But it is going up, as you can see. If you look at the landscape to your left, you can see that it is rising. Now, this is the green at Burnham Village, and over where that white building is on the left is roughly where we're going to finish. But we're going to hang a right here, so we'll be going around in a loop. Again, you can see it's still going up a little bit, not too steep, but as I say, 2.5 kilometres of climbing might just be enough attritionally to, force some sort of breaking the peloton here. So this is the last little bit of a loop. We're going to say swing round to the left, do a loop, come down Burnham High Street and finish back at that green. And that white building that I was showing you will be on our right as we finish. Again, just gently going up here. You can see all the time it's just gently going up as we're going up the north side of the Thames Valley. And as I say, nothing, there's no sort of bite point where you can shed everybody. It's not an absolutely sort of critical point, but I just think attritionally the continual sort of need to go uphill for 2.5 kilometres might just be worth bearing in mind, both if you're hanging on and if you're at the front trying to shed everybody. So here we go. Now we're going westwards, so it's sort of going to even itself out a little bit now because we're not going northwards up the side of the valley. This is the back way into Burnham High Street. Not really a cycling route, but it just suited this little cut through suited the race, so I put it in here. So there's nothing picturesque here, and so it's the back of the shops basically. But it brings us out onto Burnham High Street, as you'll see now. So this is the High Street, which is cobbles. There we are. Well, not many of them, but anyway. So we're back in Burnham High Street, and basically this is your now downhill sprint. And when we get to the end of this road, which is say downhill, so it's going to be a fast sprint to the finish once you've turned that left-hand corner. So bear that in mind. The left-hand corner brings you onto this sprint, and the sprint is going to be all downhill. You can see where the tree is ahead is the finish line with the white building on our right. That's it. We'll see you at the race. Good luck, everybody.